Tim, it's another extraordinary piece of reporting. And I think when people come back and study this period, he will go in the category with Brad Raffensperger, Republicans who voted for Trump, who would have wanted him to win in November, but had the job of counting the votes and telling the truth about what the people who voted in November said. Talk about how you found him and what surprised you in doing this reporting.
You know, Nicole, it's pretty interesting. This is a guy who I told your friends on Morning Joe this morning is seen in Michigan Republican circles as sort of a choir boy, and he is literally a choir boy. He leads the choir at his Baptist church in a little town up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and he is seen as sort of the last completely earnest man in politics, if you will. He's just known as a do-gooder, as somebody who, you know, wouldn't steal a dime, wouldn't kill a fly, to use the bad cliche, that kind of a guy. And so when his committee, the Oversight Committee, took charge of this investigation, there was a lot of murmuring and a lot of side conversations among Democrats and among Republicans about him being a very, very unique figure to take this on, because on the one hand, this is somebody who is sort of a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, very much animated by the anti-abortion cause, considers himself a constitutional conservative, has a very conservative voting record. This is somebody who does not really have a progressive bone in his body, and yet, at the same time, somebody who his colleagues knew to be sort of very offended and put off by the president's behavior and by the behavior of some of the president's inner circle and his enablers. And so it was sort of an interesting, almost immovable force meets unstoppable objects type of situation, because ultimately here was this one guy who had an incredible amount of authority and discretion as the chairman of this oversight panel to subpoena and to interview whoever he wanted and to chase down just about any rumor that had been floating around the ether in Michigan. And there were a lot of them. And ultimately, what he did was produce something that you couldn't call it completely exhaustive, because you can't examine every precinct in every county in the state. But what he did and what his committee and their staff did in smoking out basically the 7 or 8 sort of most prominent charges and claims and conspiracies in many cases, conspiracy theories, what they did was pretty extraordinary. And I think what's most extraordinary about it, Nicole, is they didn't even come back with a whiff of saying, there was a little bit of wrongdoing here, or there was a little bit of fraud here, just at the margins, but not enough to affect the outcome. Actually, no, they came back and said there was nothing. They looked and looked and looked, and they didn't find anything.
And, it's almost proving Chris Krebs right. I mean, the closer people look, it does seem that what everybody confirms is it was the most secure election in our country's history. These states, most of them have been audited 2-3 times since Election Day. I want to read some more from your incredible reporting. You write this: in many ways, Trump was the stand-in for the constituents McBroom knew, who insisted that the election was stolen, who raged against the scheming Democrats and the spineless Republicans, who believed that America was succumbing to an illegitimate leftist takeover. Most of them, McBroom realized, would not read the report either. And he wasn't sure what more he was supposed to do for them. I can't make people believe me, McBroom said, an air of exasperation in his voice. All I can hope is that people use their discernment and judgment to look at the facts I've laid out for them, and then look at these theories out there and ask the question, does any of this make sense? I mean, I thought of the incredible reporting in the Washington Post about Italian military lasers. I thought of all of Sidney Powell's outrageous claims about Venezuelan vote swapping that she's now being sued for billions of dollars for from the voting machine companies. And I thought of this question that he poses to you. Does any of this make sense? And I wonder if he had any larger observations about a party that his values are very much in line with, but that has been totally taken over by disinformation.
So it's interesting, Nicole. He and I got into that quite a bit, and really where it led, the most meaningful place that it led was a conversation about his own constituents. And I think it's important to keep in context here that this is an individual who he's a dairy farmer. He runs a large dairy farm in the Upper Peninsula, fourth generation dairy farmer, and he keeps very busy working with his hands all day and sometimes all night, and basically works almost a side hustle as a state senator. This is somebody who works 20-hour days, and I only mention that to say that he is sort of a pillar of his local community. His family's been there forever. He knows everyone, and he represents an area that is overwhelmingly Republican and very, very culturally conservative. So this is somebody with a lot of credibility, and this is also someone who understands the way that his constituents think. And I think what he found most troubling was the fact that he could spend 8 months compiling this comprehensive report, turning over every stone, digging and digging and digging for the truth, and eventually presenting it on paper, on record, in a way that's sort of easily digestible for the layman in his district, and immediately to come under siege from some of those people in his district, people who he's known for his entire life, saying that they don't believe him, right? And I think that's why I wrote that piece that you just read in there, because he's looking around realizing it's one thing if Donald Trump doesn't want to read the report that I put out and he doesn't believe me. It's another, it's one thing if Sidney Powell doesn't want to read the report, or some of these people. But the folks in a district like mine who know me, who have known me for decades and who know everything that I'm all about. They buy milk from my farm. They know my kids. They go to church with me and my wife, but they don't believe me when I'm telling them that I just undertook this investigation and I'm not finding anything. And in fact, even moreover, Nicole, some of them believe that he is bought off by the Chinese government, that he's engaged in a cover-up. And so he's looking around thinking, do I even know these people anymore? What has happened to them? It's got to be, it's strange for people like you and I, Nicole, and look, we obviously know people like this ourselves, but for somebody like Ed McBroom to be immersed in a community of these people and to suddenly just be sort of hit across the head with a 2x4 with this realization that they are living in this alternate reality, it was incredibly discouraging. And he looked, pretty emotional at times discussing this, because it raises some pretty fundamental questions about his life and his community and his own sense of belonging with these people and where we go from here. Yeah.
Well, and George Packer, writes about that too. Very small communities divided by political ideology. But his neighbors and his kids and his, community members that he sees in church, they didn't just turn on him randomly. The ex-president targeted him. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's right. Within, I think it was 12 hours or 15 hours or something after McBroom's report published, Trump put out a press release publishing McBroom's phone number and accused him of a cover-up. Those were his words. I think we become desensitized, all of us, to some degree with what the former president says and does in these situations. But for a guy like Ed McBroom, a simple dairy farmer from the Upper Peninsula, and the people in his community, to have the former president of the United States, who has this vice grip on the consciousness of millions of conservative people in this country, to have that person accuse you of a cover-up, to have this person say that you are covering up the greatest crime in American history, it's obviously pretty upsetting and pretty dangerous. And in fact, he's receiving threats. He's been receiving a pretty steady diet of threats. He's worried about his children and his wife. He is commuting 8 hours by car from the Upper Peninsula where he lives down to Lansing, where he works during the week, leaving his family all alone up there. And he's being inundated with messages and phone calls and emails, people in large part animated, galvanized by the president's own words here. And, and to take it one step further, Nicole, I would just add that we ended our conversation, the senator and I, by talking about this notion of an imminent civil war, that we will soon have exhausted all options for reconciling our differences peacefully, and that soon we are going to come to blow with our neighbors. And I mentioned to him how frequently I've been hearing casual talk of that over the last couple of years. And he just stopped me and said, I'm hearing it around here, almost every day. And that's the sort of thing that that really makes you stop in your tracks and wonder if people really believe that an election was stolen and that the greatest fraud in American history was perpetrated upon your candidate, the person who you think is the rightful president of the country, and you've stocked up on firearms and you believe that you are part of a zero-sum struggle for the heart and soul of America. Where does this go from here? These lies can lead us down a very dark and dangerous road.